We have discussed AI a lot here at CommerceNext. And it's really just because, ChatGPT has shown all of us what is possible. But the reality is that AI creates both opportunities and challenges. The marketers want the efficiency. They want the speed of automation. But no one wants to come off sounding like a robot. So today we have Rick Egan, VP of Performance Marketing at Overstock, and Tanya Van Soest, Global VP of Content and Communication at Botify, joining us to discuss how they are striking a balance. Please join me in giving Rick and Tanya a warm welcome to the CommerceNext stage.
Great to be here. I tell you, it is still not lost on me after a couple of years of not being able to do things in person, the pleasure and the privilege to be able to sit down and have real life conversations. So thank you for being here.
Sure.
Yeah.
Being in person is much better than being on camera.
Much better. And thank you to everybody else who woke up early and made it in time. All right, I'm going to start with a question for the audience. If you could raise your hands, how many of you are following the story of the missing submarine that has gone looking for the Titanic? Okay, all right. So we're all watching the news, right? Crazy. Yeah, indeed. How many of you think that AI can help retrieve and make contact with the submarine and save those people? A few. Okay, well, that's reassuring because Rick and I were just talking backstage about how there is a tendency, and I have this tendency too, to think that AI is going to solve all our problems, that it is the magical box that we can plug anything and anyone into and it will spit out all the right answers and all the right content. But such is not the case.
No.
No, it isn't. All right, so Rick, I know you're deep into this space and have been...
I don't know that I'm deep. I'm early.
You're early.
Yes.
Well, I'm a little deep. Well, let's see. Let's leave it to the audience to decide if you're deep in or not. So tons of disruption, tons of opportunity, more questions than answers.
Yeah.
How are you responding to the disruption? What kinds of changes have you already implemented? Are you thinking of implementing, dreaming of implementing in terms of your performance marketing strategy?
Yeah. Well, so I think first off on, kind of on the AI front, that's, something with, for Overstock, something that we were really are an early adopter. I know I was listening to one of the earlier ones from the VP over at Walmart said, okay, they've been doing it for a long time because, and I'm sure other people with machine learning, which is similar to AI, have been doing that. So Overstock, we've done that for a long time.
Yeah.
And been an early adopter for that. So in some ways, this is kind of the evolution for us of ChatGPT and the large language model and being able to use that evolution of AI in different ways.
Right.
And, and so those are some of the things that we're starting to do.
All right, so you felt ready to embrace the next evolution.
Yeah, I think we were, because we had experience with automation and really doing that, we do have we have an automation team in-house, so we have the engineering experience to be able to do it. So once it was open, we were quick to jump in and say, okay, what can we test? How can we go about starting to utilize some of the opportunities that this may unlock for us?
Cool. So you don't sound like you're too disrupted by all the disruption, if we're going to call it that.
I wouldn't say that. I mean, I think there was a lot of apprehension, especially from people on my team.
Sure.
As they're thinking about it, because you have people that are producing content. You have an SEO team that is always fearful of okay, if we introduce something like this, great, the engineers are going to love it, but then 6 months later, Google's going to come out against it, and they're going to get a penalty and lose all their SEO traffic.
Yeah.
So it created a lot of concern, probably from other people, on if something that an engineer can program and do and take advantage of, is this going to produce the right type of content that's going to be useful to the customer?
Yeah.
And and that's ultimately what you're trying to do is create a great experience for the customer. And that kind of starts when they come to the site. Do they get the right information that will give them what they need so they can make a decision on whether they want to buy that product from you or not?
Right. Well, I understand that completely. As the head of content strategy and communications at Botify,
Yeah.
I was curious from the start, how does this technology work? How can it support me? And for sure, total transparency, I use it all the time. It's my new latest assistant. But that's not to say that I view it more as a partnership. It's not like I'm outsourcing all of my content needs suddenly to AI and blindly taking that and applying it. If I were to do that, I think the content would be ripe with error. It would be ripe with messaging that doesn't resonate, that isn't on brand, et cetera, et cetera. So, from my little corner in the world, I can manage that on a very manual basis. And I recognize the need to have that human input. This isn't the secret solution to content development. Yeah. But the question that I have, and I'm curious how you are addressing this, is scalability. Yeah. How do you leverage this amazing technology at scale? You can't have the human checkpoint across millions of pages and SKUs. So how are you addressing that?
Well, I think, like I said, I would say we're experimenting, but we're trying to experiment with the scale. Right. So we started out, I believe, with just a few thousand SKUs. Mm-hmm. and so first, I think what we really did is said, okay, we don't, as a first step, we don't want to say, okay, we're going to let we're going to let AI create content for us. We looked at it and we said, okay, we have content, as a multi-brand retailer with 9 million products that, we have over 3,000 partners that we work with, and all of them are feeding in product descriptions for us. Right. And so we knew we have, we have hundreds of thousands, millions of pages where content is not great and not useful to the customer. Right. So in some ways we could look at our worst content and say, let's give this a shot because anything's better than what we have today. Fair enough. And so we kind of took that process and said, this is where if we could improve this, it would have a material impact on our business. Right. So we kind of took a test group that way, and then we looked at it and said, how can we refactor the content? And we started with a couple thousand, and then kind of had a few different teams of people spot checking to make sure that it was correct. We did that, kind of made sure it would work, and then we quickly kind of fast followed with that with another 200,000 or so pages. Okay, all right. So the early results were positive enough that you were ready to scale that to that extent. Yeah. So the initial piece was, can we get something that everybody feels comfortable with the output? Because it's really taking text and saying, okay, this is hard to read anyway. Yeah. How can I do it so that you would read it and you'd feel like, okay, this is good content. Things we could easily pull out, like product specifications that are just in a long running sentence. We can pull it out into a bulleted list, and we can do useful things like that really we felt, okay, this is going to make a better experience for the customer. Right. And then we did it at a larger sample, so then we could actually see what the results were. Okay. So you're not doing this through the public ChatGPT platform? No, we're working through their API. Right, okay. And so this is all internal for the time being. Yes. And you've scaled to this extent, which is a great first step. What are your thoughts on down the road scaling to enable your customers, your vendors that are selling on your platform to use the tool? Is that a possibility? It's something we're thinking about. Yeah. Kind of down the road. We had a partner summit recently, I think back in May. And so we did tell them this is something that we had done because it's something that our partners struggle with too. They have to create all this content to give to us in the first place. Yeah. So it does also kind of that, we mentioned it's something that we're doing kind of in that kind of partnership aspect. It is something where we could go to, or we can potentially go to our partners and say, okay, you have to have the human checkers for this. Sure. And then we could, take that capability, roll it out, help them produce better content that then they would feed into us.
Right.
So
Yeah.
one of the things we're looking at, I think we're early in the process, and then see, is this something that we want to hold in house, that when you come in, we'll just fix the things that we see that are bad,
Yeah.
or if it's something we want to actually take as a capability and say, okay, whatever partner A you want to go ahead and take advantage of that. This is something that we'll offer through our partner portal.
Right. And I guess with a proprietary instance, it would get more intelligent over time, and it would actually serve as a content assistant to the vendors, and help improve the content in line and in accordance to the guidelines that you're putting in yourself. You're asking for a certain tone, certain keywords to be used, a certain brand message.
Yeah.
And so I think it's fair to say that if the vendors were to use the same instance, that they would benefit from that same intelligence. So that's a pretty interesting potential model.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. And so I'm curious to dive into, coming back a little bit, the early results that you saw. What made you feel confident to take it to the next level in-house? What were some of the maybe positive and negative
Well,
results?
the first really legitimately was just, okay, I feel like I've looked at enough of these to say I'm confident that if we roll it out to a larger set, it's going to at least produce a result that feels better than what we have.
Okay.
So
right. And in terms of results, what are you seeing?
So far what we've seen is, so I think one of the interesting thing, or probably the most interesting thing to me was what we've seen is that page views for the 200,000 that we did, went up dramatically.
Right.
So then of those pages, they also generated more revenue because they got more visibility.
Right.
It does seem like what it did was our internal site search is that it made those products that we did refactor the content more findable when people search for them.
Oh, interesting.
So we haven't seen any real lift from the SEO side, but we haven't seen anything negative either. So it's been neutral on that side, but it does seem kind of our internal site search capability has created more. The attributes are better. It makes more sense. It can find the product easier. I think that will eventually translate into better SEO, but that one has not. But we haven't seen any change there yet.
Well, I guess that's part of the strategy. An SEO strategy is making sure that the content is fresh and engaging and relevant. But I guess the next step is to go in and make sure that there's no duplication of content and
I mean, I think from that side, I think ultimately for the SEO side, we're for us, it's really just been a proof of concept tool that we've done so far. It would take a lot of work to really say, what are the right attributes for these types of products? How do we start to add those things? So from kind of an SEO discovery standpoint, we'd also be feeding the search engines. We could, as well, for our kind of paid search side of the house, have that as part of our product feed and things like that. So I think there are ways that it could benefit, but that hasn't, for now, it's just been, can we do this?
Yeah, well, it's a great start. I would say that any time and attention spent on making content more relevant, more engaging, right, you can't go wrong.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned your ad side of the house. Have you been using the technology to help improve the content there at all?
No, we haven't done anything on the paid side.
Okay, next step. One step at a time. So you said that you scaled to 200 million?
200,000.
200,000, okay.
That would be crazy.
That would be crazy, yeah. I mean, so what is the cap? What's the next step then?
I think right now we're still looking at how that's working. I think my SEO team kind of keeps going back and forth on whether they want it on the product side.
Okay.
We've also discussed doing it on product categories and using it at scale there so that we So then it's kind of as we get into subcategories where then we have a lot of pages that we can use it for snippets of content there. We're also looking at metadata and using it for metadata and schema as well. So I think there are also other applications where you can use it at scale for other things that, and those are the things I think would ultimately help on the SEO side.
I don't want to plug our business, but we have some ideas and capabilities in case you want to discuss how that could be applied. But that's another story. Another question. Oh yeah. So and some of the more like funky outcomes and like hallucination type output. I've definitely seen some interesting examples. I think we all have. Just this morning on the ride here, I thought that I would test Bing with a question that I had heard anecdotally had been asked that I thought was hilarious and a good example of the humor, but also some of the strange results that can come through. I asked Bing, tell me a beautiful lie. And I had heard a story that Bing had responded to somebody, had responded to that question saying, I love you, which is fantastic, right? So I'm curious. And anyway, the response to me this morning was not quite as impactful. It said something along the lines of, you're the only person in the world that can see all the true colors of the sky. And whether that is true or not, it touched me, and I'm gonna run with it. What kind of funky examples have you seen or heard of in your industry?
Well, I think we're definitely saying, in the 200,000 set, while it's having the time to go through 200,000 isn't something that we've really been able to do, to put a human being who can go through all that. As we have gone through more of those, I mean, we certainly see kind of duplication of things. We do see some of the hallucinations. So I do think there are a lot of things still, like I said, it's super early, I think, with the technology and doing it. So as you're doing kind of in your work, you do need to say, okay, how can I train this and make sure that it's delivering the right kind of thing? Because it is still a machine. It doesn't understand context. It doesn't know those types of things. So you are gonna have those. And I think for us, and I think one of the longer term worries I have of doing it is Google came out when ChatGPT came out and said, oh, we're okay with AI driven content. But I also know, having done SEO for a long time, that Google has said, I'm good with this many times, and then come back later and either said no, or maybe just out of the blue said, oh, by the way, if you don't change this tomorrow, we're just going to penalize you. And so I think those are worries that if everybody started doing the same thing like we were doing, that the database that you're all pulling from is basically all the same. And and it's going to produce, without the human side of it, it's just going to produce the same thing over and over again for more and more people. And then the content that maybe started out as being useful now isn't useful at all, because everybody just has the exact same thing.
It's been regurgitated over and over again. Well, I'm reassured to hear you say that you think that the human input is important. But what are your thoughts on true scalability? Like, what's the potential there, and how are we going to make sure that the human input remains integral and at scale? Like that to me, it's hard to fathom.
I mean, I think you still have. I mean, you have to work through it. I think when we've looked at, or my thought around if we roll it out on the category side, is that basically we kind of take an approach where we say, let's have our content team write some number first, and then say, okay, now let's do the AI solution and say, what inputs do we have to provide the AI solution so they can produce something that is basically the same of what what we can write that way. And then once we're confident with that, then we can say, okay, now let's do this at scale.
But it needs to first be fed with some original.
You really have to kind of go through, what are all those inputs? What can you do? Because otherwise you're just dealing with, kind of an engineer who can program things saying, great, look at what I did. And, and that's cool, but are they really thinking about, they're a programmer. They're not,
Right.
they're not an editor who creates content
Yeah.
that they know a customer wants and helps to sell a product.
Right.
So
Yeah, and there needs to be that feedback loop too, right? And that requires that human engagement. I would imagine that your engineering, your SEO, your content teams are having a lot of conversations these days.
yeah, I think the engineers, once they did it, it was like, ooh, look what I can do.
Yeah, sure.
Let's do this on everything. And everybody's like, wait.
Yeah, I think a lot of us had that reaction.
Yeah.
What would you list as your 3 takeaways in this very nascent stage? Like, moving forward, but what are some of the key guidelines and considerations that you would advise?
Well, I think the first takeaway is really, stay authentic with what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
It's still, I think, authenticity in content matters.
Sure does.
And so, you as a brand, it's your voice. And so you need to make sure that whatever you're doing maintains your voice and your authenticity as a brand, because customers will recognize that. And if they feel that you're not authentic and you're not staying kind of true to your brand and true to your voice, then they're going to reject you and find someone else.
100%.
So I think that's really would be the first thing. And then I think second, is that it is it's a partnership. And, I think like we talked before, I think it really is a partnership that there's a tool out there that can help you scale and do more. But if you don't, if you kind of look for the shortcut, then
overly rely on it.
Yeah, then you'll over rely on it. And I think one of the things I always tell people is, like if you teach somebody a shortcut, they'll make a shortcut on the shortcut.
Yeah, sure.
And so it's easy to kind of do that there. So I think there are no real shortcuts. It's really about doing the work. So I think it's, going through, and if you spend the time and you create a good solution, then you can use that tool to scale that solution.
Right. And great advice. I mean, historically, we have, so many examples of automation and machine learning and machines coming into our world to help us do manual tasks that initially, as we were discussing before, there was a lot of skepticism over and a lot of pushback, and people were afraid of what does this mean? What does it mean to the job force? And are the bots going to take over and machines going to take over? And I think we've seen time and time again that no, actually, in the beginning, yes, there are errors, there are concerns.
Yeah.
It's not perfect. It needs to be taught. We need to learn how to engage and how to optimize and maximize the opportunity. And I don't think that this is any different, right? So a takeaway I think, that I'm hearing come through from you is don't be afraid. And certainly your example, right, is get in there, go, test it out, play with it, do it step by step, a little bit, test it out, make sure that you're not taking on, the world with something that you haven't looked at closely. But don't be afraid. This isn't going anywhere anytime soon, and it absolutely can be a huge advantage if harnessed properly.
100%.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. This was fun. I think we could talk all day, and maybe we will continue to talk all day about it.
Definitely.
Thank you all for your attention, and wish you all a good rest of the day and conference.
All right. Thanks.
All right.